Recording in progress.
Okay. In that case, we'll go ahead and call to order the April 26, 2022 meeting of the Oregon City Historic Review Board. The first item on the agenda, we'll ask if there are any public comments not related to items on the agenda this evening. Hearing none, we'll move into other business. The one item in this section of the agenda is the Middle Housing Design Guidelines work session. We have a staff report to start out, or?
We do, yeah. Thank you. Kelly Reed, planner. I want to thank the board for accommodating our work session set up here. After the work session, we will kind of rearrange and go back to our normal format. But we figured since we invited neighborhood representatives that this would be a nice way to hold our work session. And we are hoping to spend no more than an hour on this item so that we can get to the public hearing item in a timely fashion. So hopefully we can transition around 8 o'clock. And with that, Christina's here to give us an intro to middle housing, and then we'll go through our discussion draft of the design guidelines.
All right, thank you, Kelly. And then Aquila, can you bring up the PowerPoint as well? We have a couple slide PowerPoint. Oh, that's fine. Okay, so I've been here before, but House Bill 2001, Middle Housing, our Housing Choices Code update is moving forward. There's a House bill was passed in 2019 that required cities over 25,000 and cities over 1,000 in the metro region to adopt code to allow duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes or quadplexes, townhomes and cluster homes in our residential districts. Oregon City is reviewing that we call the minimal compliance options, which is written into the Oregon revised statutes, or the Oregon administrative rules and the House bill. And that is going actually in front of the City Commission. We had a first hearing on April 20th and a follow-up hearing May 4th, which is coming up next week. And we're looking to adopt the code changes in 2 packages. The first package is the minimum compliance options, which is the package that will kind of get us in compliance with House Bill 2001. So what are the minimum things we need to change to be in compliance with House Bill 2001? And then there are a fair amount of policy questions that kind of intersect with House Bill 2001 that we are putting into a second package, and the Planning Commission is going to start those hearings in the fall of 2002. We're looking at October. So it really is, it's the same legislative file. It'll just be a package 1 approval and a package 2 approval. Starting July 1, applications can come in that request middle housing, that if they are not already allowed, will now be allowed in the zone. And so looking at our design guidelines for new construction in both landmarks, Canemah, McLaughlin, staff thought that it would be helpful to provide additional clarity as it relates to middle housing, because we have additional clarity for multifamily or office and commercial in our design guidelines, but we're kind of silent in these middle types. Is duplexes, quadplexes, triplexes, townhomes, and cluster homes. And so we're looking at proposing an addendum to the design guidelines that can either happen before June 30th or after June 30th. We believe that there's substantial guidance in our existing guidelines and our 1740 Historic Overlay District that if a application came in July 1, that the Historic Review Board could use the existing design guidelines and code to review an application, though an addendum would be helpful for everybody. So Well, the board does not have a June 30th deadline. We're kind of working to get to a place where the board can approve something this summer. And the R3.5 and the R5 zones within the McLaughlin Historic District, we've had the ability to have middle housing, both triplexes and fourplexes. We haven't had any yet. So since 2019, we've had the ability to have some middle housing in our historic districts. And so we haven't had any yet. So I don't know if we're magically going to have any July 1, but we want to be in a place to provide that additional direction. And so what we have today is a discussion draft, and it's laid out to be an addendum. So if I was doing middle housing in McLaughlin, I would look at the McLaughlin section of the design guidelines, and then I would look at the middle housing section. So it'd be added on, it'd be additive. We didn't want to replicate what was already there in the design guidelines. So McLaughlin, I would pick an architectural style like Queen Anne. I would look at where the siding would be, and then I would go to the middle housing design standards and provide that additional direction. So when you're looking through the discussion draft, think about it in that way. One thing, let's see, there are clickers right in front of me. So this is just an overview that kind of shows some examples, not necessarily historic district examples, but just generally what these type of housing options look like. So these are middle housing types. You kind of have cluster housing on the left, a duplex in the middle, kind of row houses or quadplex to your right. So this would be not necessarily in historic districts, but when you talk about these uses, this is what we generally are talking about. In your packet, in this slide, can you see it on your iPad? Is it available? Get on there. Oh, there you go. Oh, you only can see the agenda, sorry. So what you have on the slide up here is the proposed red lines that are going in front of the City Commission, and these are our minimum changes we have to make in order to comply with House Bill 2001. So single family, detached, duplexes and triplexes basically are to the underlying zone of the district. So if you're in R6, you could do a triplex with 6,000 square feet. If you are in the R10 zone, same thing, you could do a single family detached, a duplex, a triplex, quadplex on 10,000 square feet. You notice the townhomes are quite different, and the state legislature gave a very specific direction about the townhome minimum square footages. So one thing that I'm really looking at, kind of think the most direction the board can give is provide that townhome direction, because that's kind of a new minimum lot size and something that was not necessarily anticipated in the 2019 equitable housing update for all the districts. You also have the R5 and the R3.5, which is our medium density. The historic commercial zone does not allow the middle housing right now. It just allows single family detached, but does not allow triplexes, quadplexes, or townhomes. So if you're in Canemah, those lots on either side of 99E in the historic commercial would not allow middle housing, would not allow row houses. If you are in the mixed use corridor, actually, there was an add-on by the Planning Commission. If you want to move the Zoom, Aquila, to the side, because there's some writing there, yeah. So as part of the City Commission's review of uses, they added on in the mixed use corridor district, so that would be 7th Street, a little bit of High Street and Center Street. Duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes are allowed in the mixed use corridor, but townhomes are not allowed. And then let's see, next slide. The overlay districts still apply to all middle housing. And so historic review overlay, you might be able to build a triplex on your lot, but you can have a qualitative review. It's the only time you can have a qualitative review is when you're in a historic district. You can have discretionary review, and our design guidelines are that. Natural resource overlay district, if you propose a development and encroaches into a stream buffer, you need to mitigate just like any other project. And geologic hazards. So I wanted to walk through the geologic hazards code as it relates to both McLaughlin and Canemah. So if you see this map in front of you, McLaughlin is very constrained by the Geologic Hazard Overlay District. So you have this steep slope, you have landslides, and you have the buffers around that. So the steep slopes are kind of the pink and the dark pink, and the landslide buffers are kind of the brown and orange colors, and then the light yellow are the buffers around those. So if you have a lot that's located in one of those areas, you are limited by your density with our existing code, and our city commission recommended continuing that approach. You have a 2 units per acre or a minimum 1 single-family detached lot. So we've identified in blue dots, lots that could potentially have middle housing. And those are a little bit by the Canemah Park on 4th and 5th, though some of those may be further constrained. We were being conservative. And then the areas along 1st Avenue, right along the river, though those areas are constrained by the Natural Resource Overlay District buffer of the Willamette River. But the uses potentially, a lot of those homes have, a lot of those lots have homes on them. So it would be maybe adding on to an existing single family house to add that additional unit. Of course, any demolition is approved by the board. So, vacant lots where the board is not reviewing a demolition is about the only place you could allow a townhome. So I don't know, there may be 1 or 2 lots in all of Canemah where that may be the case. Most of the development along 1st Avenue already has homes on it. So that's saying they can't, but that, just so you understand, those are the areas we're talking about where geologic hazards does not limit the density.
You said the mixed use commercial.
An historic corridor as well does not allow middle housing. That would allow single family detached. Along 3rd.
Along 99E, that front 99 don't have a blue dot on them because those are in the historic commercial district, which does not allow the middle housing types.
It's kind of counterintuitive because those lots, given some of they're just those old metal buildings that are not high value, would make the most sense for redevelopment into something like that, but.
And that could be in maybe a further conversation. But I think right now our goal, at least with the city commission, is what are the minimum changes we have to make? And then if the community wants to look at other opportunities for middle housing that would go above and beyond House Bill 2001, that's something the city commission can take up.
Yes, in the Canemah historic commercial along 99. Mm-hmm. So you're saying, I thought mixed use we could have divide.
Those were removed in 2019 as part of the Equitable Housing Project. So townhomes are not allowed.
Townhomes.
Correct. 3 and 4 plexes are not allowed, and multifamily is not allowed.
Correct. So commercial uses are allowed in mixed use. So if you can have a dwelling associated with a commercial use, but multifamily development or townhomes, 3 and 4 plexes are not permitted in that area.
We have some apartments along the block.
Right, and those would be pre-existing uses.
Yeah, but and again, that seems to be a desirable use maybe for some of those right there. And you're saying we can't expand that.
That would be, so if the community wants to expand middle housing into the historic commercial, they can. But that would be, really, we're trying to separate out what's the minimum for June. And then additional policy topics, we're looking at go beyond for
phase
for
2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there, we have some areas where there's some questions about our multifamily zone and is our density correct? So there's a number of policy questions we are going to be reviewing in the fall, just so we can have a more holistic view, knowing that we're getting adopted what minimally has to get adopted in order to meet the deadline. So let me show you McLaughlin. It's a little bit different. The geologic hazards are kind of on the edges. So you have kind of the areas of the south near Waterboard Park that are in the geologic hazard, as well as in the north area, kind of, I think that's like 12th, or maybe 12th, 10th, 11th, 12th, where they kind of have that hillside a little bit, that little strip. And then a little bit by the high school and High School Creek. So those areas, once again, limit to 2 units per acre, would not allow middle housing. But the other areas that you see that are just the overlay photo would be potentially available for middle housing. I'm also going to show you the zoning code. So in yellow is our low density residential zone, it's R6. And the brown is our 3.5 in our medium density residential zone. And then the orange is the mixed use corridor. So basically middle housing can be in all the yellow and all of the orange areas. However, I'm going to go back to this. Well, if you want to move the zoom again to the bottom, sorry. You'll notice that, you know, McLaughlin is R6 zone, but a lot of those lots are 5,000 square foot platted lots. So some of the larger uses like quadplexes, cottage clusters would not be, or potentially duplexes and triplexes would not be allowed. That being said, 2 lots could be combined together. So it's unknown, you know, there could be situations where middle housing could be allowed because a tax lot may have more than 1 lot of record attached to it.
In Canemah, where we have our plat, and they're basically R5, yet we're zoned R6. Now I'm trying to, the old historic platting, and we're now talking R6 now, is there?
So when you have the geologic hazard over that, the geologic hazard controls the 2 units per acre. So most of Canemah has that control. If you don't have the geologic hazard, so that those areas along the river that we were talking about, that the R6 zone would apply, which means you would have to have the 6,000 square feet. So the same thing, you might not be able to, if it's just 1 lot, you might not be able to do middle housing. But if you combine 2 5,000 square foot lots of record, because you happen to have 2 of them, you might. All right, so I'm going to go back to the, I'm going to try to go back. I think I lost my. Do you mind just advancing for me? I keep advancing. I don't know if I have any other slides. Okay, so that is a little overview, which means that each historic district and potentially a landmark that may have, we don't have a map of landmarks because they're kind of all over the city, though they're kind of clustered around McLaughlin and in Park Place. If you have, if you are at McLaughlin, Canemah on a landmark that you can have middle housing, then we need to have design guidelines to provide additional direction for those areas. And so in front of you is a discussion draft that looks at kind of providing this addendum. And what I'd like to do this evening is we can go through the topic by topic and identify, is this tracking with the board? Is this something you want to include this topic? Is there things that are missing, or is this topic not relevant and you think already is addressed in other parts of the design guidelines? And I might give it back to Kelly for kind of this discussion moderation.
Yeah, thanks. We're just going to walk through it kind of informally. And, you know, this, again, we just kind of threw some things out there. So feel free to tear it down, disagree, you know, tell us to take it out because it's awful, if that's how you feel. So starting with draft guideline number 1 on this first page, and everybody should have a hard copy in front of them. Sorry, Jessica, you'll have to do it online. So draft guideline number 1, the materials, siding, scale, roof form, architectural style, and design elements of the structure should be consistent with the adopted design guidelines that apply to residential construction. So this kind of cites a lot of different guidelines that are already in the guidelines. But I think what we see as most important for middle housing is volume and massing. We have multiple units stuck together. So we have our current guidance on volumes here on this first page, which for Canemah says maintain historic residential massing, and for McLaughlin, well, for everything says for residential building, 1.5 stories, essentially. Not allowed buildings with excessive mass. Does anyone have any thoughts about volume and massing that you think need to be added to the design guidelines for middle housing?
Massing is an issue that is inherently can be incompatible when compared with other houses, like houses in the neighborhood, so as to all of a sudden you don't build an incompatible house that detracts right next to a compatible or a historic contributing house. And so in our historically, we have always said that does it detract from the neighborhood? And if massing becomes too great, then it becomes visibly detracting, then how do we limit that? And we have a responsibility in Canemah to be in compliance with the federal charter because of National Register Historic status. So I question how we can expand that.
Tell me about it. I had a whole conversation with DLCD last year, and I know Kelly actually added their policy draft and about their interpretations. And I think kind of where I see for the design guidelines, we're required to permit it, and we're required to provide direction on how to build it. It can be discretionary. What we can't do is have such, and I don't think we're going to be there, but I'm going to show like both ends of the sideboards. We can't be so restricted that you actually can't technically build it. And then, so we can't be there because then we aren't actually allowing it. But we can be very prescriptive about what we think is a compatible way to build each individual middle housing type, if that makes sense. So we couldn't say townhomes, I'm just trying to think of something like townhomes cannot be more than, I can't think on the fly, what something was that just you actually couldn't physically build it. And so therefore you are not allowing it. So we have to go through the kind of truth test of like, if when we're all done, could someone actually build this? And if that can happen, then we've met the intent of providing clear direction for compatibility that doesn't disallow the middle housing type. And so that's what I'll be looking at to make sure as this goes through is, we have a straight face test? Have we provided guidance that shows that each middle housing type could actually be built and still be compatible with the district? So we got to find that place.
And when we say townhomes, now we get into attached and detached townhomes.
Townhomes are attached by their definition.
By nature.
Yeah, and we'll get to the townhome section because I think that staff thought providing additional, like calling out townhomes itself as its own animal compared to like duplex, triplex, fourplex, which is kind of like a variation of a single family housing form.
But historically, we've also had problems when we've had like connecting garages, where we had a kind of a passageway.
Right.
And historically, we've tried to say that they should be detached and separated. But now, with this middle housing, I could potentially have townhomes by appearance attached by
potentially, but we could say where the garage is located to the side or rear. We could potentially do that. But we could say in this particular case, this is how townhomes can be built.
And just by the nature of doing townhomes, you're going to get more larger buildings than you would if it's a single family residence. They can be small individual townhomes, but you'll have 3 or more of them connected. So that will be, just by their nature, it'll be larger.
I mean, we can skip around. Does it sound like people want to talk about townhomes first, or do you want to go through it?
I had a couple comments on the
Sure.
first one, if we want to stick with that, but I guess my initial thought would be that the massing should still be, materially consistent with the style that you selected for the building. So if it's a vernacular style that you're kind of trying to work within the boundaries of that the massing should still not be a, gross miscaricature of that, in the sense that it, is some, you're not going to like just take the basic vernacular style and then make it 4 times as large, and, it would be kind of comical. So whether it's a vernacular or a bungalow or a more commercially oriented style building, it seems like the scale of the structures should still fit within sort of
With the predominant single-family housing type?
yeah, that would be my thought. And if your total massing is pushing past the boundaries of that, then you should split it into multiple, likely into, rather maybe into 2 structures. If it becomes a fourplex, it's really kind of like 2 duplexes or something.
That are attached through like a hyphen or something.
Yeah,
that may-
yeah.
So with this, I'm just thinking of the ones that have recently passed with the bungalow home, the massing is getting bigger. So those 2, I mean, the ones I've seen, they could be split into 2 homes because of the massings currently. So the question is, how much bigger is massing going to get than we have currently? I mean, those passed, but they're getting close to being a little bit size-wise, I think, above what we'd like to see in the neighborhood.
Just want to call your attention to Jessica as her hand up. So.
Oh, I didn't.
I had a similar, question or comment to what Grant had said. As far as massing and establishing some sort of guidelines for these multiple unit structures, are we able to give guidelines like, a single unit can be up to X feet wide and X feet deep, and a single unit being whether that's a duplex or a quadplex, and if your design is to exceed that, can we, divide it up? I guess my line of thinking was right along that same way. Is that the type of detail that we can put into this part? Is that appropriate here, or should that sort of thing go somewhere else, or is it mentioned somewhere else?
I think you could. I would probably shy away from a specific numbers since the rest of the document doesn't. I know Paul wants to work on that, but I would do it as more of a percentage, like.
Okay.
You like, duplexes, I mean, I'm just thinking up as an option, like duplexes should stay within the realm of a single family house, massing, triplexes and fourplexes can be, 1 point something times the size, but past that, they should be separated into separate building masses, maybe connected and attached. I think those are the kind of directions using percentages or rather than specific numbers, since the rest of the design guidelines don't have specific numbers. That's what probably my direction would be.
That would make sense to me. Kelly had put together a really good analysis for one of a previous application that had the sizes and then came up with the average of all the contributing of a certain style. And that was really helpful. And if we were to turn that into some sort of guideline or based on a, if you're kind of exceeding certain boundaries on that by, a percentage, so say you're more than 125% of the average, you're kind of getting into that red light zone or yellow light.
Separating into different.
Right.
masses.
Not to say that we have to dictate what they can apply for, but that could be kind of a yellow flag that maybe you should, at this point, start thinking about.
I think providing numbers actually might be a lot more clear to the builders and developers, who are trying to build this middle housing. And so I would say there might be a way to actually use numbers, like we can get at them in that way that you just suggested, Grant, but maybe not have a hard, this is the absolute maximum you build, but something a little more softer guidance on, well, if you're nearing this number, then that's your yellow flag, like you said. So maybe that's something we can bring back for a discussion next time we talk about this.
I'm assuming that there's still some, percentage of lot coverage that will be taken into consideration with these as well. Is it still the same percentages of lot coverage that would be allowed, or does it extend the amount that is allowed by a single structure, whether that's a 2 or a 4-plex?
Yeah, I mean, there's always the underlying zone dimensional standards for lot coverage. And with the Historic Review Board, you put extra guidance and further restrict it if you can tie it to the design guidelines and the purpose of the restriction. So keeping massing more compatible, and so it's not adversely affecting the historic resources nearby, is a compelling reason in a historic district to provide additional restrictions. So while you can start with the underlying zone, lot coverage, the board can require smaller lot coverage if they can show that it is ensuring that the designs are compatible. But once again, I think we always have to do that sniff test at the end, like, can you still build the thing? And are we not excluding a particular use altogether because of the design guidelines?
Thank you.
Anything else on massing and volume before we move on to the next?
On massing, there's still the issue of the NROD areas or landslide areas that where there's limitations based upon the degree of slope.
And that's not proposed to change. That'll stay the same in the Geologic Hazard chapter.
So if you are in the Geologic Hazards chapter with the reduced density, you can only do a single family house.
Okay.
So you'll go to the existing design guidelines. You wouldn't even get to this addendum.
So I'm going to move on to draft guideline number 2, which is on the second page, entryways. So, these plexes might have, they could be designed with a single entryway or with, 2, 3, or 4 doors on the front. So we just threw this out there to require something designed to read as a single entryway. But then we have some images here of historic existing middle housing types that have multiple entryways. So we wanted your thoughts on, what you think is appropriate and whether we should have any guidance on combining entryways or not.
I've seen a lot of bungalows with multiple entry doors in the front. It seems like they've been converted from an earlier time and now repurposed as into more of apartments. And I think that we've seen it take place, and I've seen it take place on historic buildings already. So I don't know that it detract that much, personally.
The Spanish Revival one on the top right-hand side is in our district. There's 2 versions of that, and they both they were historic duplexes built with 2 separate entrances. There's 1 door on each of in the alcove. So that's an example in our district. The 4-plex that went in after a multifamily burned down basically created 4 separate structures that were all attached. So that's an example of, they kind of read as separate units, but that really is a 4-plex on how it's built. So that kind of depends.
I think it depends on the design of the home. You wouldn't want the Spanish doorway on one of the other homes, but I think it would depend on the design that whoever's building it has. I think the entryway goes with the design of the home.
Any other comments on entryways?
I guess it gets into the next guideline
Yeah.
too, but I see the four square on here that looks like it was probably a conversion. It probably wasn't originally that way, I'm guessing. But it's not, to me, that's not egregious, where I'm like, oh, that looks terrible sort of thing. But I think if you were to mess with this overall style and architectural elements of the design by adding multiple porches or like more defined, like separate, kind of like the fourplex that's in the picture there, that kind of gets so far away from what the style that you're trying to kind of integrate with, then it would be more disruptive. So
Like if you took the existing four square here and you were trying to like create little separate fakey entrances,
right, yeah,
then that's different than having kind of four doors in a central.
yeah.
So it's like the doors are integrated into the architecture of a single family form.
Yeah, that's kind of, I mean, that's my initial impression, I guess, is that so long as if you can put the multiple doors in without disrupting the major architectural elements of the style, then it's not too disruptive.
I agree.
I agree with that too. I think it keeps most of the change then inside of the building and really keeps the outside pretty true, with just the exception of some added front doors.
Any thoughts on the guideline number 3 for the porch? It's kind of, I heard a little bit from you, Grant, that it's kind of the same idea, that if the style supports that, then it might be appropriate, but not necessarily, that porch is not necessary all the time.
So it's like a qualifier if the style supports. So, word that, but. So having one, if you were going to have a porch, it should be defined as the whole massing and not like two separate massings. Unless you're creating two separate massings, like, with the connector. Kind of like what they did on the fourplex here. These are four separate massings with a breezeway in the back.
On a sloped lot, it could be easy to create a secondary entry on a lower level that has its own facade, own entry, that's separate completely from the first floor.
Right, yeah.
And corner lots often could have
Yeah.
what would be kind of considered the side door, the kitchen door, be turned into a unit 2 entrance. So I don't know if that needs to be further refined. Like that's an okay option as well, that you're repurposing kind of entryways and doorways that were secondary entrances in a single family home layout could be repurposed, even if it's new construction, as a secondary dwelling unit entrance.
That seems reasonable. I think the guy, to me, would be, so long as it's somewhat consistent with the original style. So it shouldn't necessarily be two fronts that are equal in, I don't know what the right word is, but, that the side door is probably less grand than the front entrance.
Right. I like how you talk about how it's not disturbing the architectural elements of the prominent residential style. It fits its way in.
So in the interest of time, I'll move to draft guideline number 4. And I think that this is actually probably already generally in our guidelines. Parking areas and attached garages are to be located to the side or rear of the structure. I think we could probably actually remove that just because it's already in the guidelines themselves.
I was going to ask if the attached, there's nothing about middle housing that requires attached or dictates that.
Except townhomes. Because townhomes assume, I think,
for parking though, does it include that there would be?
no,
Nothing in the general code ever requires a garage. Sometimes it requires off-street parking. But that could be a driveway, right? Or a garage. And then for townhomes, I think what we'll get to that, but we would say, to be consistent with the rest of the guidelines, we want no garages on the front, right, in the historic districts. And so they'd probably be built with rear load garages or none at all, and just have like a parking space in the back. But I guess this guideline would preclude a driveway in front, even if there's no garage.
oh, yeah, it would preclude the ability to provide uncovered parking area, which,
Off-street parking in Canemah is critical when we have unimproved right-of-ways, because it becomes dangerous to people, particularly with our coded bike walk pathways, which is our roads, where we have no paths. And we have limited, let's say 21 feet on average of asphalt.
sure, so one parking space is required per unit for middle housing, but a parking space can really just be a parking pad that's located to the side or rear of the building, or a long driveway that's located to the side or rear of the building.
I have a question about that, because looking at the fourplex that's here as an example, that they look like 4 little individual units that are actually attached. Do those have integrated parking, or is that it looks like just street parking to
Yeah,
me?
and this was an odd situation. This was a fourplex. It was a house converted to a fourplex sometime in the mid-20th century that burned down. So they were able to build this back in 2013. They were able to keep their non-conforming fourplex, and it did not, it allowed on-street parking for the credit. So, and this was also, so this was a little bit of an odd duck project, but it is a good example of what 4 kind of detached but attached units would look like. If this was a middle housing in McLaughlin and a new lot and not part of a non-conforming burn down, you probably would have some parking areas in the back.
I see, thank you. I was just making sure I
Sure,
understood
yeah.
what counted as parking for a unit.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I'm going to skip over numbers 5 and 6. I think, unless anyone really wants to talk about them, because I think those are pretty much reflective of what's already in our guidelines. And then we'll move to townhomes. So the first townhomes guideline is care should be taken to ensure that the total building mass is no larger than 1.5 times the size of the largest historic single-family residence in the district. So, Grant, here's where we might be able to provide a little bit more of a number, right, based on what the largest home in the district is. 1.5 sounds okay to everybody? Too high, too low?
What number would that be? I don't have my calculator with me. Math's not my forte.
Well, okay, so the largest single residence in the district, I'm going to just talk about McLaughlin because there's probably a lot more opportunity in McLaughlin for townhome development. What do you think?
What do you think, footprint? Total size or probably total size?
building mass. Largest home in McLaughlin, what, like 2,500,
Probably 2,100.
2,100?
I'd have to look, but that would be,
So like 3,000 square feet, let's say.
Okay.
Would be 1.5 times
so
that.
basically 1,000 square feet per unit. We're doing back of a napkin math here, but,
Yeah.
but that's kind of the idea.
Okay. So we have the huge home in Canemah on the corner of Miller and Highway 99, big Victorian, that's like 4,000 square feet. So that would be,
Is that all historic massing, or there's some additions onto that? I would take the historic massing of that one as the,
yeah, there's no garage to that home. Just 1 to 3-story home, the basement, the main level, and the upper level. I think there's 3 bathrooms and 5 bedrooms.
Wouldn't count the basement, would we?
Would count basement, okay. It's a daylight basement, if that makes a difference.
yeah, we can take a look at Canemah for that, but I think 1.5, when it gets less than 1.5 the size, then you start getting the question of, are we in a place to connect? Because we're saying, and the next piece was that definitely in Canemah, where there's 0 examples of any type of these close to townhomes, you couldn't have more than 3 together. I think that's something reasonable we can ask for with still staying safe within the HB 2001 requirements. So we can take a look at the massing, and maybe we look at Canemah versus McLaughlin and the largest historic, and then put that percentage question. We can get back to that.
I think, I'm just kind of brainstorming here, but I kind of feel like sometimes townhomes are more awkward when they're in small groups than when they're actually in a larger, like looking at, like the bottom thing, I could see kind of in McLaughlin, or really, I guess it would be outside of McLaughlin, but the more urban-y parts of Oregon City where a group of townhomes could fit into the, and look good. And so I'm kind of wondering if 1.5 might actually be too small, in the sense that if you were to put that together, to me, the townhomes that look like they use architectural elements from single-family homes are more awkward than the ones that kind of
Like
embrace.
the 2 at the bottom that look more
That
commercial.
are kind of like, don't try to hide that they're townhomes or shy away from the townhome style. They just kind of lean into it a little more. But that's, I don't know, I'm kind of talking off the top of my head here.
Yeah, these are hard ones.
If you were to take a look at that, the old yellow hospital at South Second and High Street or South End Road, right where you turn going down next to the Still House. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Mhm.
There's this. It's been used for all sorts of things, and but if it was to ever be really redeveloped, and it has good potential for affordable housing. It's a redevelopment location where you could put basically 4 stories if you come in from the Tumwater Street at a lower level, and then have the South End Road or High Street at that early part up there. Somebody could go in and redevelop that into something, that location.
Yeah, and I think that is our 3.5 zone, if I remember correctly. So I think that is ripe for middle housing.
And so I believe that's in Canemah too. I think it's in the historic district.
Oh, I mean, that's in McLaughlin. I think that's in the McLaughlin Historic
It
District.
is? Where does the boundary of,
It incorporates this.
because Canemah's historic district boundary,
No, it doesn't go all the way down.
it doesn't take
cuts-
that?
No, it cuts right at where South End and 5th hit.
Right.
You have to go up the hill a little bit.
Yep,
If we could
Yeah,
bring
that's
back
right.
the PowerPoint, we can show that map.
at the hill.
Okay.
They came to one of our meetings once, but it wasn't.
But to me, that's an example of a place where we could, where you could really do something and create a lot of housing. But we'd have to have partners or somebody to make it happen.
The map's at the beginning, sorry. A map of the McLaughlin
Oh, back
district.
to the PowerPoint, yeah, that one.
Yeah,
So let's go look at the bottom. I'm trying to do my eye look here.
so I see Tumwater there, so that's
It's
South Second.
R6. That property is R6. Oh. So that's in McLaughlin and R6.
Okay.
So it is eligible for middle housing. Unless it's in
Is this 301 South High?
Yeah.
It's MUC.
Sure.
Stay here.
But it's too, we'd have to zoom in. Paul, we can follow up on that. I think it's in the mixed use zone, so it would allow for multifamily development and in the way that I think you described. Any other comments on townhome volumes or, how many units can be attached in a row?
Is the height, townhomes, you see them now, they're a lot taller than used to be. Would they be limited to a story and a half, or would they be the full height?
So if you go back to page, I think 2, at the top, it has the current guidance on heights. And in Canemah, residential heights are limited to 1.5 story plus basement, and then McLaughlin is 2.5 story maximum height plus basement. So unless we added something specific to townhomes, that's the guidance that would be applied.
One thing that kind of comes to mind with the townhomes is that there's a lot of historic districts in the United States that are all townhomes and things, and it would be easy to fall into it. How do you, we don't want to create a false sense of history and pull in a historical style that's not actually historic in either of our two districts. Even though those are probably, they share some elements and time periods, and so how do you balance those things of not making it?
Yeah, no, I think you've actually hit on it, which is we're here to describe how middle housing can be designed to fit within the context of our two historic districts. And we can provide refinement to the underlying zone's dimensional standards and direction on material size massing, as long as we've created a template that you can actually build the thing. So I think that is a fair case where the more clarity we can provide a direction for this middle housing, the less likely we're going to get someone to say, oh, townhomes in Portland, there was historic townhomes in Portland, there's historic townhomes in the Northwest, why can't I just build here? We'll go back and say the significance of the McLaughlin district shows this type of design style and this type of use. And this is how row houses can be compatible in the district, whatever district you're in.
Historically, we've not allowed craftsmen in Canemah where we have identified bungalows and vernaculars as acceptable. And bungalows have historically been small in Canemah, and there's another size of a bungalow that's been in McLaughlin.
Yeah, and I think it's much easier, I think, to take a vernacular style and turn it into a row house. And so that may be some direction, like especially in Canemah, like how do you Queen Anne and vernacular have, higher roof pitches? There, you have Queen Anne's 2.5 story, you have vernacular's 1.5 story, and then bungalow's kind of this lower pitch, lower building. So that is, I don't have a question how, but that is an interesting piece of how to provide additional direction of if you want to utilize bungalow elements in a row house, are we just acknowledging that it's this other animal and you're using the bungalow because it's going to be hard to translate the squat, short, 612 roof pitch into a townhome style. I don't have the answer to that one.
I mean, our guidelines could provide a little direction on what styles are appropriate if you're building townhome, right? Like try to, and to Grant's point, maybe a more modern style actually would serve to tell the story that this is new. This isn't part of our history. It's part of, today. Mm-hmm. So that's a thing aspect of it.
And as always, the design guidelines are considered a safe harbor. So if someone came in with a different design type and made their case, the burden goes on the applicant to do that. So I think our goal is to make ones that they can reasonably use. Burden doesn't go on them. Kind of wanted to use the safe harbor approach.
Any other comments on townhomes? Okay. And just to touch on it for a minute, cottage clusters. So these are typically detached groups of homes designed around a shared open space, and they're limited in size. So cottage clusters have a maximum average for each development that's about 1,000 square feet, I think. And then they do require some amount of off-street parking. And again, I think it's important to point out the minimum lot sizes that we saw earlier for the cottage clusters, and we can kind of provide, next time we talk about this, the information all in one place. But your lot has to be fair on the larger end to be able to do cluster development, first of all. And so the two guidelines that we have thrown out there for your consideration are that cottage cluster unit designs and forms should vary within the cluster to avoid identical or near identical designs, and that flexibility in materials and design elements for units that are visually removed from the public streets is appropriate. So like in this example, the 4 units, or maybe the ones in the back corners that are less visible from the public street, might have more flexibility in what they look like and what materials you would approve.
One more I wanted to add, we've been working with the City Commission on attached garages and detached garages. This is citywide. And so additional guidance on when and where detached garages or an attached garage, like a 200 square foot attached garage, could be allowed. So you could definitively say all garages should be detached, even if it's a little 200 square foot individual one. Or you could say they can be allowed, but they have to be in the rear. Those are kind of, I think, really good to provide that clear direction of where and how either combine garages where multiple units may use one garage, or an individual 200 square foot garage. Where can it be located, and can it be attached or not?
Yeah, that's a good question. I could see this type of development having wanting to have, where like the parking spaces are, having connected like single stall garages for multiple units.
Right now, our code allows a 600 square foot shared garage. You could have 3 200 square foot together, and that could be like in a parking area. So that's an option that the board could, support. You could say any garages that's associated with any individual building must be detached. I mean, those are the kind of things that the board can think about how to provide that direction. Or if it's attached, is it only in the rear? Only if I can't see it? Those are the kind of questions, like in what circumstances would an attached 200 square foot garage be appropriate?
I think a rear garage is always appropriate. You don't see it in the street. It adds more usability and flexibility to the people who are living in the homes. I imagine some of the elderly people would be living in cluster homes. And we have our great Northwest weather, so it'd be much nicer to be in your garage, safe and secure. They were attached from the rear.
I think so too. Because if it's unattached, it's expense to build that garage is the same. You have to get permits for that too. And so the cost to build a detached garage is very expensive. And if you're going to spend money to build cluster homes, you're not looking at, some high values. These are people that are retired people or first-time home buyers or young families, and having them detached brings the cost up significantly in building.
So one thing we can put in the revised version, and so once again, this is a discussion draft, so we'll just keep putting versions until we get consensus, is allowing, which is consistent with the changes to the code, which is allowing an attached 200 square foot rear garage. for the detached shared garages. That could be like, not really shown here, but you could imagine instead of having a parking area, you have a larger garage with 3 garage doors, and multiple units would share that shared garage.
What is the difference between a garage and a carport? If we get
Kind of
into,
the same thing. In regards to, for the planning division for
or
footprints.
planning, so, you know, a carport, i.e. does not have walls all around it.
Right, but for us, it's still, so a 600 square foot accessory garage and a 600 square foot carport, we would view them the same in planning. It still has to, we would see them as a 600 square foot accessory building, regardless of walls or not.
Does Canemah allow carports?
You know, I don't know if the design guidelines touch on carports, nor have I seen anybody propose them. That's
I
an
don't
interesting
think it
question.
allows them in
I
Canemah.
can't think
I don't know if we may be silent on them, so that's a good question to look into.
And if the garages are detached, they should be the same material, same color as the home. When they're not, they look like crazy, so they should be the same.
Okay, any last comments before we move on?
I have one more question. The cottage cluster homes, can they build more in Canemah?
Well, let's go back to that slide. It would only be able to be built in the areas that are not encumbered by the geologic hazard code.
We changed our geologic hazard
What's that?
code last year, which
Would have precluded the existing
exactly.
middle housing cottage cluster you see in Canemah today, if it had
Right.
just
So-
come in.
Yeah, so that code actually served
You wanna go
to
one
further
more to go
Yeah, one more.
restrict. So that code basically said not just the steep slope in the landslide areas, but all the buffers of the steep slope in the landslide areas are also restricted in their density. So that means the whole middle of Canemah, everything that has a pink or orange on it has limited density, and middle housing, like a lot of the middle housing types would not be permitted there because there would be too many units on a small property.
So where you see the blue dots are the where you could get into the situation, and then with, sorry, can you scroll down to the page that has the, actually maybe above,
The first
the
one.
first page that has the table, yeah. So cluster,
In
So-
our
I didn't see
So
one there.
are you thinking of like in
Yeah.
between the current ones and where your house is, there's that couple of those lots that are
Yeah,
open
right.
and flat?
There's up on there,
So it looks like they're yellow, but they're buffers because
Yeah.
they're close enough to the steep.
but we also have a development, you know, they want to put more up there above.
right, and
South End Road.
they're bound by our current code, which
They're
is
bound
2
by it.
units per acre within the areas that are the geologic hazard. So not every area is in geologic hazard in that above section, outside the district.
So in the buffer zones, it's 2 units per,
acre. So.
Or
you-
one
Or
unit
1
per-
unit as a default.
property.
per lot or per platted lot.
The way the code is, it's 2 units per acre for any lot that existed as a standalone tax lot before 1994. So if I had multiple lots of record that were combined, but it had not, but it's still combined, you still potentially only get 1 house. And 1994 was the year our geologic hazard code was created.
They would have had to been split
Before that.
before that.
Thank you.
Is there any,
Complicated.
we'll come back, we'll provide a revised discussion draft at ideally the next historic review board meeting that's available.
I think there's one more comment
Oh, sure.
from,
Just looping back to the general massing after kind of the discussion about square footage within McLaughlin, I just did a little bit of searching around on the map. And we actually do have a single a couple single-family historic homes that are in excess of 4,000, even 4,500 square feet. So if we're taking a 4,600 plus square foot home and, multiplying that by 1.5 times, we're getting close to like 7,000 square feet. And those houses are obviously on very, very large lots, but it seems like a 7,000 square foot structure might be inappropriate for McLaughlin. So I'm starting to question whether the 1.5 times is appropriate or whether we need to put a cap on, not to exceed 5,000 square feet or something like that.
Yeah.
Because you have some very large houses, I just discovered.
Or maybe it's the average historic volume.
Or something, but maybe not the biggest historic structure or whatever.
And I do want to clarify, only because I get this a lot, is that oftentimes some of the historic homes, they have non-historic additions, and those don't count in that discussion of the historic size. It's the house that has, anything that has contributing a square footage.
Yeah, totally fair. And that might be the case. The one I'm thinking of, I don't think it has extra square footage, but that's something we can always chat about later. It popped into my mind as I looked it up really quickly how large it was.
And that's a great discussion of average versus largest versus using numbers. And maybe we can come back at the next meeting with options that kind of look at it from different ways.
I just felt like also I was like 7,000 square feet seems very large for this neighborhood if we're talking about massing and being appropriate.
And that's not the intent.
So so I think that we, as Christina said, there's going to be 2 packages for adoption. The package of amendments that the commission is considering right now that will be effective July 1 for our compliance with HB 2001. And then there will be a follow-up package of code changes to kind of address all the outstanding questions and the policy changes. And I think that the guidelines will probably run with the second package. So that means we have a few months to get to a final draft. And then that will go to the city commission and be adopted by resolution before it's formally effective.
All right, well, thank you everybody for all of your direction. We will take it all. We'll provide a revised draft and maybe some options when we're hearing, especially related to massing. And then we can have this discussion at a future historic review board meeting. Yeah, thank you all.
One final comment. I believe that we need, middle housing cannot be $500,000. Okay? We need a matrix. If we're really honest about trying to create middle housing, one of the things we need to do is potentially have a grant. If houses could be sold for 50% of the medium average house in the district or something, they could get a rebate on their SDC fees.
Yeah.
Some way we can mitigate SDC fees in the creation of affordable housing, middle housing. And right now, at 45,000 before you break ground in fees.
Yeah.
Not including all of the costs of trying to go through HRB and get a geohazard report.
I agree. Middle housing is more like 20,000 per unit, but I think the city commission heard some options at their February work session, if I remember, that looked at kind of non-land use. And we're definitely looking for direction from them in the next, couple of years. What are things that they want to look into as relates to the financial side, not the land use side, but the financial side of supporting middle housing and especially affordable middle housing. So keep talking to your commissioners.
Well, I think that we need to put down a comment into there that goes to them that says that $45,000 SDC fees before you break ground
Portland does it through HUD.
is too much if we want to create middle housing.
There doesn't pay for them.
All right. Do we reconfigure? Okay. You want to take a hiatus or?
5-minute break.
Yeah, guess I should say that in the microphone, huh? Okay, I guess it's 8:14, so we'll take a 6-minute break until 8:20 to reconfigure the room and restart at 8:20.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody, for great direction.
Are we set?
Yes.
Yes, we are ready.
Then we will go ahead and reconvene the April 26th, 2022 meeting of the Oregon City Historic Review Board. The next portion of the agenda is the public hearing portion of the agenda. There is one public hearing on land use applications scheduled tonight. Our role as the Historic Review Board is to conduct the public hearing and to make decisions about the matter before us. In making those decisions, we must apply the applicable codes and laws and cannot vary from or change those laws or codes. Members of the Historic Review Board are to be unbiased. Before the start of the hearing, I will ask the Historic Review Board whether they have any potential conflicts such as family, financial, or business relationships with any of the applicants or with regard to the land in question. I will also ask whether any of the Historic Review Board members have discussed the application in question with any of the parties or have independent knowledge of relevant facts, such as from a visit to the site in question. Any member of the audience may question any Historic Review Board member about their disclosures. A staff report has been prepared for each application and has been made available to the public 7 days before the first public hearing. The staff report identifies the approval criteria that apply to each applicant's proposal. Staff has analyzed the criteria which are contained in the staff report. The quasi-judicial hearing procedure that the Historic Review Board will follow is set out in state law and the Oregon City Municipal Code. The hearing procedure steps are shown on the Historic Review Board website and on the wall in the chamber. Public testimony will be called on in the order it was requested in advance of the meeting. If you have not emailed city staff at planning@orcity.org to request to speak and would like to testify, please raise your virtual or physical hand when I ask if there are any others in the audience that would like to participate. For the public record, please begin all testimony stating your name and city of residence. If you would like to receive a copy of the notice of decision, please state your mailing address or email address as well. Testimony and evidence should be directed toward the applicable approval criteria. If you believe other criteria apply in addition to those addressed in the staff report, identify and discuss those criteria and explain how and why you believe they apply to the application under consideration. Any person may submit written material while the public record is open on each application. Any written materials received by the city staff during the time in which the record is open will be placed in the record. Written materials submitted to the public hearing during the public hearing must be presented to the city staff in order to become part of the record. If you intend for PowerPoint presentations, reports, pictures, or other exhibits used in your oral testimony to be placed in the record, copies must be submitted to city staff while the record is open. If they're not given to staff, they will not be included. Any person wishing a continuance to present additional evidence or testimony or to keep the record open to respond to new evidence must make that request before the public testimony portion of the hearing is closed. If the Historic Review Board makes a decision with which you disagree, any issue that you may wish to appeal must have been raised on the record for consideration of the City Commission or the Land Use Board of Appeals or both. Without raising the issue on the record with sufficient detail and accompanied by statements or evidence that the city and all parties can respond to, the issue will not be deemed appealable to the City Commission or State Land Use Board of Appeals. In addition, the failure of an applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to the proposed conditions of approval with sufficient detail to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Now we'll open the record for Oregon City file number GLUA 22-00004 and HR 22-00001. Historic review for modification of HRB decision HR 2004 for a proposed single dwelling with detached garage at 4th Avenue and Hedges Street in the Canemah National Register Disrict. I'll now ask each Historic Review Board member if they've had any ex parte contacts, conflicts of interest, bias, or any other statement to declare, and if they've visited the site and have noted any material information. If there is a site visit, the Historic Review Board member must declare what he or she has perceived. Board Member Belknap.
For the last meeting last month, but I visited it at that time.
Thank you. Board Member Egger?
I have no conflict. I have visited the site. I know the site very well, and I've never talked to the people, or I have no interest where I would be financially involved.
And Board Member Ferry?
I visited the site. I have no conflicts and no ex parte contacts.
Thank you. And I will address first conflicts of interest, bias, and ex parte contacts. I will note that I'm the owner and reside at 407 Fifth Avenue in Canemah. As the owner of that property, along with my neighbor, the owner of 349 Fifth Avenue in Canemah, and the applicant have a maintenance agreement in place with the city to maintain the paved driveway on the unimproved Hedges right-of-way. However, there's no financial or other impact to myself based on the decision of this application, so I don't perceive there to be any conflict of interest or bias. I'll also note that I have visited the site, and one thing that I have noted is that in the surrounding homes, none of the surrounding homes have the garage on the same level as the main structure or main home. Does anyone in the audience wish to question any of the Historic Review Board members about these disclosures? All right, hearing none, we'll move forward to the planning staff report.
Thank you, Chair Blythe. Could you please pull up the PowerPoint? Thank you. So we were here last month. This is a continuance. And because I've received some questions following the publication of the agenda, I'm going to go into a little bit of the history of this project, just for the benefit of everyone who wasn't on the board in 2018. Again, this is the property location at 4th Avenue and Hedges, and here's a street view. We saw these last time. So to just really quickly go through the project history, the applicant requested design advice from HRB twice in 2018, subsequently submitted an application and received approval May 28th, 2020. So that's that HR 2004 decision that we keep talking about. During that time period, they held a pre-application conference for their geologic hazard review, submitted an application, and then withdrew that application. We required another pre-application conference because of the amount of time that had passed. So November 2021, that second meeting was held and the application was submitted and approved in January 6, 2022. So the site plan that you're reviewing today is that plan that was reviewed and approved in the January 6, 2022. Then the HRB application was, or the historic application was submitted in March, and we held our first hearing at the end of the last month. The board continued the hearing with a request for more information. So the applicant has provided more information, and that includes a tree preservation plan from a certified arborist. And so there's a map of all of the trees and then a table that describes the condition of all of the trees, along with kind of an updated plan showing how the trees that are proposed to be preserved are going to be protected during construction. The applicant also provided a drawing with some proposed mitigation for the exposed foundation of the garage. So you can see in this drawing, the siding, the horizontal board siding is pulled all the way down to the ground on that garage structure. So the applicant proposed mitigation in that way, along with some vegetative screening, if the board wanted to consider that. The applicant also submitted a letter that talked a little bit about the reasons for the change, being, to reduce the amount of excavation on the property. And that was in your packet. So forgive me for the complexity here, but I wanted to be very clear about what your options are tonight and then what the implications are of those options. So I'm going to get into kind of some analysis after this, and then we'll come back to this slide, but I first want to kind of go through the options. So option one is to deny the entire proposal. And so the staff report has been written with findings in support of option one. The implication of this is that the applicant would be then relying on the approval that they got in 2020, HR 2004, and would still be subject to the conditions of approval for tree preservation. So what that decision, what that condition required is that if the tree removal or preservation plan changed, that the applicant would have to come back to the board with a revised design that would attempt to preserve additional trees on the site. And so in this scenario, the applicant would actually end up back at the board with that revision. And the reason for that is that, if I go back to this, you see the tree, I'm actually going to get up and point to it. There, that tree was approved in 2020 as being retained, and it was the only tree on the property. The other trees being preserved are off, outside of the property lines. So that was the only tree inside the property lines that was going to be preserved. The arborist report indicates that that tree suffered a lot of damage and limb loss and is not healthy and it should be removed. So, and I think that's regardless of any, whatever the site plan is, that, the health of that tree is what it is. And so that would be removed, and that would trigger that condition of approval to have the applicant come back with a revised plan to try to preserve other trees on the property. So I'll go back to the options. So that's option one. And also in option one, because the plans that were approved in 2020 had the garage back in the back corner, those plans would require the applicant to go make some revisions to meet the geologic hazard conditions of approval, right? Because those plans were not the ones submitted through and approved through GeoHazard. And so there is a lot of flexibility in the geologic hazard approval. So the applicant could make some changes to the grading plan and potentially still meet those conditions of approval without having to go back through the geologic hazard review process. So option number two would be to deny the garage relocation, but approve the tree preservation plan with conditions. So that would solve the problem of having the applicant need to come back to the board again for tree preservation plans. But it would also require revisions to the geologic hazard plan to meet conditions of approval. Option three would be to approve the proposal with conditions. So the board would could do that, close the record, continue to May 24th, where we would come back with final findings. So the findings in the staff report currently are written for a denial. And so we'd have to write new findings for an approval, and probably conditions based on your direction. Because of the 120-day deadline, being currently July 6th, we would need the applicant to extend that deadline to July 21st in order to accommodate option 3. Option 4, this is just a continuance where you request more information, continuing to next month. That would, again, require the applicant to extend the 120-day deadline. And then option 5, there were some questions from board members about whether the board could not just review the proposed garage relocation, but just kind of review the entire proposal. And that would be a possibility if the board were to make findings that the previous HRB decision in 2020 was flawed. And if you did that, then you could continue the hearing to review that full proposal, and provide direction to the applicant and staff on the desired design changes to the overall proposal that we come back with. So implications of that are that the hearing would need to be continued to a date certain that's earlier than May 24th because of the 120-day deadline. The ability to get an extension in this scenario is probably not possible, and so we would have to meet that July 6th deadline, which means we would have to have a special meeting May 19th or earlier. And I also want to note that in previous decisions, the board has limited its review to the proposed changes only. Any questions about these options before I move on? Mm-hmm.
Yes. On option 5, the building is being moved. Has moved how many feet? I don't know what it is.
I don't have that number off the top of my head.
The main building has moved, and they repositioned the garage to parallel with the house. I'm trying to make sure that the ability of the HRB to review both the house and the garage, is that consistent with what we have the ability to do?
So that would be option 5. So in order to do that, the board would have to make findings that the previous board's decision on this matter was flawed. And then we would need you to provide some direction to us on what you would need to, how the applicant would have to change the design to satisfy the board and the design guidelines. And then we'd have to come back. We'd have to schedule a special meeting to kind of accommodate the timeline in that option.
Well, part of the problem inherently has been that on the geologic hazard area where the house is being built, there's significant parts of the property that are above 30 or 35% grade that limits construction and on that property. And so if I understand it correct, that ground disturbance or this disturbance cannot be greater than, is limited at 40% of the total lot size. So if the total lot is, if the lot is a 10,000 square foot lot, total ground disturbance can only be 4,000 square feet of ground disturbance. And does that include in ground disturbance the tree removal? So if you start looking at all of the roots and you're taking out all of that and all of the driveway and all of the walkway, all of that is ground disturbance, correct?
Yes, ground disturbance, you're correct. I think that, however, all of that is criteria in Chapter 1744, reviewed through our geologic hazard overlay. And so the applicant has an approval with conditions that their final plan has to comply with that 40% maximum. So their preliminary plan did comply, so that's why it was approved with conditions that, you know, when more details are provided, you know, when the applicant has kind of final grading plans and final building permit level drawings, that those also continue to comply with that standard. But that's not the purview of the Historic Review Board.
It's not our purview, but now the discussion point in the previous HRB meeting was on the size of a bungalow house and comparable bungalow houses in Canemah to this house. And one of the comments was that the garage is about the size of many of the historic contributing bungalows. And so if we take the house and the garage in combined, how does, is that a criteria that could and should be reviewed?
So I think that it is appropriate to kind of think about the site in its entirety. And when we're talking about massing, you know, the location of each structure, you know, they have an effect on each other, right? And on the overall character. So in a sense, yes, you know, that's a consideration that the board can make. But I think that the decision, well, in past board decisions, the focus would be simply on, you know, what conditions of approval would you place on the garage relocation, and not necessarily the house, because the house location has been approved. And really it's the garage is being proposed to change. So that would be the focus of the board, unless you were to go with option 5.
Well, we're looking at now a horizontal view of both structures side by side, and exceeding what people see or what is comparable in a bungalow house. And this also has a daylight basement. And so it, in effect, with the dorms, it's 3-story bungalow. And I don't know of one comparable or example of a 3-story bungalow in all of Canemah. And so in that compatibility comparison, isn't that applicable?
I think it's up to the board to decide kind of which direction you want to go. And if you're going with option 5, then you're choosing to reopen the entire discussion about the design of the house and the size of the house. But if you're not going with option 5, then you're going to be just focusing on the garage and the location of the garage.
So it's really up to the discretion of the HRB if they want to review the mass considerations of the initial approval of the house itself. How much? What are all the changes that have been made to the house design over what was done in 2000?
Well, we haven't, in my staff report, I didn't do any analysis of the design of the house, because the applicant didn't request that the board approve any changes to the design of the house. And so how we would move forward normally would be, we would look, when they submit their building permits, we would be looking for those changes that the board is requiring through conditions of approval from 2020. And those would be the changes we would look for. The applicant hasn't proposed any other changes to that design.
Okay. I'll let others comment. Go ahead.
I do tend to agree with you, Paul. I do think that the massing of this structure and or proposed structure and garage are out of character for the neighborhood. I think the tree removal is also out of character. I've given this quite a bit of thought over the last few days. And looking at the 2020 staff recommendation, when this was actually approved by the HRB, it does not look like staff was recommending approval at the time. And I do think that the HRB decision to approve this was flawed due to the massing of the structures, the removal of the tree canopy, the fact that this property is south of 3rd Street and that area of Canemah is described as a forest setting with native and ornamental plants, providing privacy, and clear cutting is not allowed. Even though this is not a literal clear cut, it is about as close as you can possibly get. The only trees being maintained or retained are in public right-of-way or on neighbors' property. The garage is, like you said, basically the same size as some of the houses in the area. The height of the foundation of the garage itself is taller than half a story. I don't necessarily think that covering with more siding makes up for that fact of how tall that garage is and how inappropriate it seems for Canemah. I have some other notes here. Most of my notes have to do with massing, and the fact, the height of the house itself, the size of the house is significantly larger than other structures in the area. The width is, I believe, exceeding the range that is in the guidelines for historic building within this historic area. The 2020 staff report did determine the design did not comply with the guidance. They were granted approval with conditions of retaining the trees. These changes have now, proposed to remove all the trees. So that does not seem like they are, retaining those conditions. They also, in the arborist report, it shows that there was significant damage to the trees from the ice storm. That was in 2021. There has been no pruning or general health maintenance of those trees to show that their intention to keep them. If they were trying to keep them healthy, I would think that they were trying to keep them. There is also significant ivy growth on some of the larger trees, and the ivy growth has not been mitigated, or they haven't been life-savoring the trees and to remove the ivy. It doesn't really seem like they are intending to maintain the trees. So I wonder if there was ever an intention to actually follow through with the HRB's conditions of approval. As a lot of us know, there was also a falsified arborist report submitted to the board and to staff last meeting, and I don't think that was actually really said aloud in the meeting for anybody who did not receive that report ahead of time like our board did. And that to me just really feels icky and feels like they are not intending to actually follow through with what the HRB had required for that approval. So I would vote for number 5 for all those reasons.
I have additional slides in my staff report, but I'm happy to wait for a discussion if you want to have one or more questions.
Any additional comments at this time, or do you want to move on with the rest of the staff report?
Oh, I would like to review the whole house and garage in our process.
Okay, well, let's continue and then we'll.
Okay, so here are the 2 site plans. On the left is the 2020 approved site plan with the garage in the rear corner of the property, and then you can see the revision with the garage moved up next to the house. Nothing different from last time. And there's that tree that's unhealthy, and the arborist recommends for removal. They're shown with a red X on it. So here's the original plan with the location of the garage in the rear corner. And there's the revised plan with the garage moved up. And in order to reduce overall excavation on the site, the garage is kind of placed on top instead of digging into the hillside and kind of having that garage floor be lower. It's being kind of placed on top of the grade, which means that front elevation has a big exposed foundation. So it's 6 feet in height at its tallest. And the building itself is 25 feet wide. It is set back. It's not built up next to the house. So you'll see in a couple slides. It is set back farther than the house is, 48 feet. So there's the width of the house, the width of the garage. I did provide in the written staff report a bit of some comparisons to some of the historic homes surrounding this property, and their widths, not their volume. So I wasn't looking at the footprint of the buildings, but just the width. And so those range between, I think it was 24 and 36 feet. So this garage was kind of in the range of the width of just a home on some of these other lots. There's the original plan with the garage in the back, kind of looking from the east. And then there's the revised plan. So you can see that the garage is set back a lot farther from than the house. And then you can kind of see how that foundation is being exposed because of how it's placed on the land. So the tree protection plan that the applicant submitted is shown here. So you can see the tree in the middle of the site being removed, and then the trees that are in the unimproved right-of-way between the 4th Avenue pavement and the property line. That's tree 1, 19, 15, 16, 17, I believe. So those are being protected by tree protection fencing. And I believe, according to the arborist report, some of those trees are in fair health and some of them are poor. They all have ivy. But it sounded like that could be remedied. And then there's some trees on the neighboring property that the arborist proposes to protect through fencing. But again, these trees are, they can be protected during construction, but it's not clear if they would ever remain because they're on someone else's property. The design guidelines, and we talked about this last meeting, but the design guidelines calls for minimization of removal of trees that are over 6 inches in diameter. And clear cutting of lots is not allowed in the design guidelines. So, when we talked about the options, there was that option 1, which was full denial. Option 2, which was denial of the relocation of the garage, but approval with conditions of the tree protection plan. And so just for the board to consider, if you want to consider that option, you could consider some mitigation as conditions of approval. And I apologize for this not being in the written staff report, but we're talking about it now. So there is a tree, so there are other trees on the site that could potentially be preserved. In particular, there's tree number 7 here, and I'll point to it again. I'll get up here. It's on the edge of the property, and that's kind of where the driveway comes in from Hedges. And, you know, I don't know for sure, but it's possible that that tree could potentially be preserved by adjusting the width of the driveway. That could be preserved in exchange for the tree that's being removed in the middle of the site. And that tree number 7, if you look at the table, I know it's small text and hard to read, but the arborist identified that as being in fair health. There might be other trees as well that, you know, are in okay health and that, you know, things could be adjusted to preserve, but that one seemed like maybe the easiest one to preserve, requiring kind of minimal changes. And of course, the board can always consider just requiring additional mitigation trees be planted with the finding that, you know, because the trees in the right of way are being preserved, that the applicant is not clear cutting the lot and can meet the guideline just with additional mitigation for the additional tree that's being cut. So if the board wanted to go that route, we could you could come up with a condition or two and some findings that we could add. So again, those options here tonight for you to consider, and I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Kelly, isn't there a condition in the trees on the coverage of the canopy as to not to delete or dramatically alter that coverage with tree removal?
Are you referring to a guideline or the code, the Geologic Hazard Code?
I've been told that there was a limitations on tree removal that remove canopy because there's a required level of canopy to be maintained.
Yeah, so we don't have any standards that relate to an amount of tree canopy. However, there is a standard in the Geologic Hazard chapter that requires geologic hazard review whenever someone is removing more than 25% of the tree canopy on a property. And so I think that would be triggered here, right? But they have gone through geologic hazard review for that and for the grading and the building that's being done on site. So the geologic hazard review kind of handles that aspect.
Okay.
If there are no other questions for staff at this time, we'll go ahead and take the public testimony before we come back to the board. Is the applicant on the call tonight, or?
No, I don't see them on here.
Then we'll go ahead and move into other public testimony. So we have 2 comment cards. Again, if you're representing an organization, you'll have up to 5 minutes. If you're representing yourself, up to 3 minutes. The first card that we have is from Ron Beislein. You could state your name and place of residence.
Ron Beislein. I live at 712 4th Avenue in Oregon City in Canemah. The first conversation I'll have is from the Canemah Neighborhood Association. We did talk about this at the meeting. We asked people if they'd like to make comments to comment to the city or give me any comments, and there was no comments made for the Neighborhood Association in either way of this property. And so if we did send comments in, I think Mr. Green sent a comment in. That's the one I think I know of, or maybe one more sent one in, but we were not told anything at the meeting about this property and the changes they wanted to make, either positive or negative. Thank you. So my personal comment, Hal, on the property. As I read the statement that the applicant made, it seems to me that, and I think Paul and Kelly discussed it, it seems to me that it's not a geohazard problem with walls or cliffs. It's mostly has to do with ground disturbance in the size of the excavation. And so I don't understand what the difference of moving the garage is from one corner of the property down to the other one, because I would think they'd use the same amount of disturbance because the driveway's gonna be the same. The footprint of the garage is the same. So I don't know if there's if the house was never designed properly in the beginning when it was submitted, and the disturbance was always there and nobody caught it back then. So that's something that I think that you may ask that question to the Engineering Department of Developmental Services, their engineers, because I don't see what the difference is. And I think that most of the issue is ground disturbance. So the question then brings up is, how much smaller would they need to make the house or the garage to meet the ground disturbance or the guidelines for the neighborhood? Otherwise, I don't want to see them have to go back and redesign the house. It's already been approved. I just like to understand the disturbance, why they can't meet the disturbance, or was it flawed at the beginning that the house was have been affected back then, because that is code, and that is part of the pre-app when you go through it. That is listed in the ground disturbance before we even come to you. So I don't understand what happened. Any questions for me?
Questions for Ron? No?
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Ron.
I emailed out a comment that we received earlier today. Just want to make sure that the board members all received that email. If not, I can read it for the record.
Yes, I received it. What? Email comment from today? Yeah.
It was from Chrissy Gress.
Jessica, did you receive it as well?
I did receive it and read it. Thank you.
Okay, great. The next comment card is from Linda Basinger. State your name and place of residence, please.
I'm Linda Basinger, and I live in Canemah. I live at 516 First Avenue. This had been a vacant lot, and the trees in Canemah at one point had been completely, everything was bare. If you look at the old historic pictures of Canemah, all the trees were gone. So these are just trees that grew up on their own. No one's taken care of them, loved them, trimmed them, taken care of them at all. So I think you should follow the science and go with the arborist. And if the arborist says the trees are in poor condition, to remove them. We did have the ice storm. That was awful. But we're still losing branches from that. Windstorms that come through, they're still falling down in Canemah. They were damaged and they just didn't heal. So I think you should definitely follow the arborist's advice. And if the trees need to come down, take them down before they fall down. And after they've had the geological studies, many times there are things that have to be done, adjusted. And this, again, I think we need to follow the science of what the people are doing. None of us are arborists or geologists. If they say things need to be adjusted here and there to put the house, trees need to come down, I think we need to follow that. As a person who lives in the area, I would feel better knowing that the trees aren't going to fall down at another time, or the soil, let's disturb that as little as possible, whereas it is in a fragile area. So my option would be for you people to go for option number 3. We do not want these people to have to go back and readjust their houses again. They have been doing this for many years, started in 2018. Okay, that went off, they started all over again. But that's a long time to have a dream and to do something. And we were just talking about affordable housing. This is an example of what makes the houses unaffordable. So my option would be to vote for number 3 on those bases. Just follow the science. I mean, thank you. Any questions?
Any questions for Linda? Thank you, Linda. Okay, so given that the applicant is not on the call, that would conclude the public testimony portion of the hearing. From here, we can move to the board to decide if we want to close the public record, make a decision, or if we want to select one of the options that involves, I guess,
Kelly, can you bring up the options again?
So I guess maybe what we'll do is just go around the board and poll the members and see how we would prefer to proceed. Board member Belknap.
Option number 5. And the best way to, I mean, in response to, was it Linda, the woman who just spoke? The best way to maintain like soil, right, is to keep trees planted there, not to dig into the soil and to remove trees. No, I'm not an arborist, but I do know that much about ground stability and geologic hazard zones. So that was just my response to that. I do believe that this massing of the structure is inappropriate. And no, this is not an affordable housing project. This house is giant and it's expensive. This is, I believe that is not an applicable concern here. Thank you.
Board member Egger.
I would go along with option number 5. I would prefer to see this hearing delayed to a date certain where design changes could take place that would meet. To me, this is should be, if it's going to be a bungalow house, it should have bungalow house proportions in mass. And the garage should have bungalow as would be comparable to houses in historic Canemah, contributing houses, bungalow houses in Canemah. I don't feel that this exists currently. And therefore I would like to have it re-reviewed.
Board member Ferry.
Redo an entire HRB decision. I worry that we would be making it, there's already, you know, such an issue with people coming before the HRB. They are nervous about it, they're worried about it. And then to know that during, you know, a small alteration to their property or a large alteration to their property that's already been approved, that they could have their entire project re-reviewed, I would think would be detrimental to the process. I do agree that the house is very large and the design is maybe not as on point for Canemah as it should be. But I had come here with the idea of going with option 2. And I can explain why, but it seems like we're not talking about that.
Sure. Yeah, we'll go back around depending on how we go here, I guess. So my personal perspective, Speaking to the garage itself, I would lean towards one of the options that involves denying the relocation of the garage. I think perhaps there are some conditions we could put on it around the original design that would allow them to reduce the size and move it a little bit towards the hedges right away that might mitigate the ground disturbance and excavation such that they can work within kind of the general position and design that they have, but make some small tweaks to that to not have to come back again for that. The trees in the arborist report, unfortunately, the main trees on that lot, I think there's no design, the right kind of in the center of the lot. So there's unfortunately no viable place you could put, you know, looking at the very old design that was approved in 2005 or 4, any design, regardless of massing, would likely require those major trees to be removed. I do think that they are looking at it, you know, from my unprofessional perspective, that they are pretty damaged from the ice storm, and it may just require that trees be replanted and you know, there might be a period of time to kind of get it back to a great state, but there may not be a great option there. And then on the house itself, I guess my perspective is that I agree that the massing is significantly larger than I would like to see. I wasn't happy with it when we reviewed the application in the first place, but we did review it in good faith, followed the process, determined that it met the criteria for approval, and approved it. So I tend to agree with Board Member Ferry's opinion that I think, you know, I can count on, you know, dozens of instances where in the last 6 years on the board that I've made, you know, decisions or comments that maybe I would have made differently, knowing what I know today, but they were done in good faith, and I don't like the idea of reopening the process and putting that burden on the applicant when they submitted the application in good faith, worked through the design advice process, and ended up where they are today. So even though it's not my favorite design of all time, and I would like it to be smaller, I would likely not support reopening the proposal in full and going with option number 5. So I would be advocating that we go with something that's in the ballpark of 2 or 3 that would likely deny the garage relocation, approve the tree preservation plan with some conditions, and then potentially add some conditions that might allow them to reduce the size of the garage in the existing approved application to be able to pass the geologic hazard review.
Wouldn't that be closer to option 1 then? I'm just clarifying what that would mean based on the criteria here on these options.
It's covered up on the screen here. What,
Wouldn't that basically just revert it to what has already been previously approved? That's my understanding? And
I think with option correct? 1, they would almost certainly have to come back again here because assuming the existing plan will not pass the geologic hazard review.
Do we know it won't though? I don't think we have any proof that it won't.
I think the reason that it would have to come back to the HRB in option 1 is because of the trees, because there was a condition of approval in 2020 for a revision to the, you know, for any revisions to the tree preservation plan to need review by the HRB. So if the HRB denied what was presented tonight, then they would still be, you know, subject to that condition. The geologic hazard review would not necessarily need to happen again because those conditions are the Development Services Department has indicated that those that the plans were approved with conditions. And so as long as any revised final plans meet the conditions of approval for, the amount of disturbance and all of that, that they can be approved even if they don't reflect the exact site plan that was presented in that geologic hazard review.
So they could decrease the size of the garage and that would be fine. They wouldn't have to go through geohazard review again, or
right?
What you're saying?
Yeah, I think, footprints can change, driveway footprints could change, all of that I think is flexible in that geologic hazard review.
I'm still have this, I would love to see a comparable bungalow houses listed off in Canemah that are bungalows and what they represent, so that we could, in square footage, height, to where comparables are available, so that where we're able to see and delineate honestly, is this compatible and comparable to a bungalow in Canemah? And I don't believe it is. But I think that before we move on, because it is setting precedents, that we should be able to take a look at that and see a listing of all contributing historic bungalow houses that are in Canemah, so that we can have direct comparisons. And that would be, to me, until that happens, where we can make that comparison, I'm not ready to rule out looking at everything. And I'd just like to see that in our hands.
It seems to me that both the 2020 and our current staff, report state something along the lines of the size is bigger than should be allowed in Canemah and does not meet the design guidelines. It exceeds historic volumes. There's so many words like that are coming from 2020, and we're seeing that in our report today. I feel like if we are supposed to say the analysis from 2020 that approved this was flawed, I think it was flawed. And they had approval. They had a chance to appeal that, and they didn't. They are now coming back and they've made changes, and opening that can of worms again comes with I think a little bit of re-review of everything to some point, especially when the HRB went against the staff recommendation in 2020 for this approval. Believe me, I don't want to have a separate meeting for this, but I also don't think that this is appropriate for Canemah.
Carrie, I see you have your hand up if you'd like to speak.
I just wanted to add a couple of thoughts about this discussion about reopening the house. And I think that there's a couple of problems. There's the one that Chair Blythe mentioned, which is this idea that a person comes in good faith and gets an approval and ought to be able to rely on that. And they are coming, you are correct, with a garage now change, and so that is what you are reviewing. So when we talk about it was flawed, that there was some factual thing that we didn't know then that we know now, and I don't think there is a fact that what is drawn now is what was drawn then. And we knew that going in. So I don't think you have a factual distinction. I think that what you're suggesting is a different interpretation of what appropriate massing is. I just don't know if it's fair to review that against an applicant who did get an interpretation of the code. I mean, certainly different boards will interpret the guidelines differently. But I am a little reluctant to say that there was a flaw in that just because different board members are interpreting the standards. The second point I want to make is we don't have an applicant here to extend the 120-day clock, to express a willingness to engage with respect to the house or the garage or the tree removal. And we've got a decision deadline of July 9th, and we cannot miss that deadline. And we have to provide adequate time for a review before the city commission. So I am not convinced that option 3, 4, or for that matter, 5 are on the table when we don't have an applicant here willing to engage with the board in a dialogue.
Does it change anything based on the fact that at the last meeting we were submitted with a falsified arborist report, and had they submitted a real arborist report, we maybe could have had a different discussion at the last month's meeting?
Well,
I'm delaying us a month, essentially.
I can't, the veracity of the evidence submitted does not extend the decision-making deadline. I think that if the board is concerned about the applicant's good faith in coming with this request and willingness to explore alternative designs and bring their arborist to the meeting and have a discussion about trading tree 7 for tree 5 or whatever those kinds of discussions would be, the appropriate course would be to deny the proposal and just let the applicant come back when they're ready to have a conversation about appropriate design and mitigation for the tree removal. I mean, that is, I think, what the lay of the land looks like right now.
Carrie, a question of you then on this is, one of the reasons why it came back was that it exceeded what I understood exceeded the 40% of lot disturbance in a geologic hazard area. And so the house and the garage in combined and tree removal and just activities in the property exceeded 40%. And when it did, what that says is that they have to reduce it or get it to a point by whatever actions they can do to get it under that 40% threshold. And it's because of that this review really took place in the first place. If I'm wrong, I don't. I'm sorry, but that's what I understood was really the base reason why this is back. And so if it's the garage that's part of the size that's too big, or it's the house, or it's all of the driveways and all of the removal of all the trees and the disturbance areas that are going to be, and walls or retaining walls and everything else that's being proposed, if it exceeds 40%, and that's the threshold that's that is required under our code under 1744, then it comes back. And so if it does, then we should be taking a look at it with them, because the garage is literally supposed to be the same size. Maybe it's moved over a little bit. I have not, but this whole idea of what we're trying to do is get something that is in size that's appropriate, not only for geologic hazards, but for what is comparable and compatible in Canemah for a bungalow. And, you know, and that's the reason why I wanted to see what we have in reference to that, and it would help us make decisions. And the fact that the applicant is not here, maybe this should be delayed until the applicant could be here, so that they could participate. But I'm just, if it is delayed, then I would love to have reference material of what bungalows are in Canemah and have that available. And I think that would be a reasonable request.
Chair Blythe, we did an analysis of bungalow sizes, like a comparison analysis in 2020. That full staff report is not currently in the record. I think we added the decision and the plans that were approved back then, but we didn't add the entire staff report with all the findings. But if you'd like to see that, we could manage to pull it up and add it to the record now.
Yes, I do think it'd be good to have available for the board here. It does seem to me that reducing or modifying the design of the main house might be one of the best paths for them to be able to, you know, satisfy the requirements of this board and the geological hazard review. However, I think I align with, you know, Carrie, that I don't think the decision was flawed. It may be a different interpretation, but there wasn't a material problem in the way that there was missing information or the way that we completed the review. So I think that I would advocate for something in option 1 or 2, and then hopefully, you know, the applicant would come back and maybe they would be open to making some adjustments to the scale of the house to help mitigate that. You know, they've kind of framed it as the problem is really with the garage, but really it's not necessarily the garage. It's the only path to getting to an acceptable design that would pass both reviews. So, you know, we could deny it and provide comments that, you know, requesting that they, you know, look at other options, or that might include changing the massing of the house.
I would be open to that. I think that would it would be nice to see some like compromise, because we haven't really seen any effort on the part of the applicant to make any changes to the house or, you know, really the size of any of the structures in order to achieve like any tree, you know, maintaining or reduce geologic, you know, and digging into the hillside. So I would like to see that.
I agree that option 1, just a denial and have them come back with another sort of plan, seems like a good option, because then we could possibly save tree number 7 with a narrower driveway, maybe a smaller garage or a smaller house footprint.
So Kelly, I know you're trying to pull that up too at the same time, but so in option 1, they would likely have to come back in any case, but only for the tree portion necessarily, is that?
Right, so I can put the whole condition.
I'm sorry, I don't know if you can see on the screen behind you. Maybe you can, I feel like I'm missing it.
Is that the link for that? The folder HR 2004.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that. Okay.
Page 21. In the meantime, I will pull up Yes.
Everybody see? I've lost track of where I am.
Oh, wow. So the condition of approval 2020 pertaining to tree removal was that the applicant shall consult an arborist on how to protect the 6 proposed to be preserved during construction and submit the arborist recommendation to the city and follow all the recommendations of the arborist. So they've done that, right? Because they have this arborist report. If the arborist report indicates that the survival of the trees proposed to be preserved is doubtful, the applicant must return to the Historic Review Board with a revised site layout that achieves better tree preservation. So that's the condition that kind of they're going to be grappling with still.
But if they were able to pass the geologic hazard review with the design as is, they could proceed with the rest. Well, if they were able to, I guess they have to come up with a tree plan that will work.
Yeah, they'd have to come back to the board with the tree, with a revised site layout that achieves better tree preservation or something that you'd be willing to approve, right? Whether they'd have to go back and redo any geologic hazard applications is not totally clear because I think it depends on, what they'd have to make. But there is flexibility, so there's not a guarantee that they'd absolutely have to go back and do that over again.
Perfect.
The dimensions on the 208 Third Avenue house reflect dimensions after it was highly modified, not the original structure. So there's a significant add-on to that house.
And I'll add too that the yellow row here doesn't reflect the final approved size of the house, right? Because the width was reduced down by the board through a condition of approval to 37 feet. So the width and then the footprint is less than what's shown here, the resulting. But yes, this is the table that was provided, and Aquila, if you scroll down, there's additional. So these are bungalows within the district, like historic bungalows, not any newer ones. These are very approximate because they're based on a rough measurement from aerial photos. So take them with a grain of salt. So it shows the average, that's the footprint. And then I believe that's the analysis that was done is simply the footprint and not necessarily the size, like the overall volume or the height.
Thanks, that's helpful. And I do recall that I think we keyed in on the 37-foot number as being the widest of the contributing bungalows. And so we used that as the criteria for what was approved. Oh, no. But like you said, that doesn't account for the height or the kind of, because of the slope having sort of that basement lockout.
Chair Blythe, I would like to just point out that it looks like the applicant has joined the Zoom meeting, although I do recognize that you've closed the public hearing, but wanted to bring that to your attention.
Yeah, I think, so at this point, I guess, do we feel like we have consensus on a path from the board to go with option 1, or are we still uncertain on that?
I don't feel option number 1 is acceptable. I think I would prefer option number 2 or or 5 of the options, but not one.
So option 2 would,
Sorry, I'm trying to bring that back up.
would approve the tree plan, but deny the garage. Is that?
Well, I see, in my, the tree plan is still, I have real concerns about the tree plan when the original tree plan was submitted without an appropriate signature showing that it was legitimate. And so the tree plan itself still is up in the air. Is what we're being talked now being presented to us, is it, does it have the correct review of a authorized signer? Because the previous one did not. It was a fraudulent one, if I understood it correct. It was presented without having the person who signed it was not actually the person who signed it. So somebody signed it without their permission. And so it just leads me to question a little bit about the tree. What is correct? And so kind of like I worry about the trees, but I'm more concerned about the overall mass and height. This is a bungalow that's 3 stories with big dorms, and dorms over every footage of it, and is not consistent with what a bungalow design looks like. It's the inconsistency is so great in design and imagery. This appears to be a large 3-story craftsman type design that is not bungalow, but that it and horizontally across it and depth wise, it creates immense mass, not only in mass in square footage, but in height.
Okay, thanks, Paul. I think Board Member Belknap, you're likely to be kind of the determine the direction that we go here. Do you want to, are you feeling like you have enough information to either decide if we want to make a decision on the application in the realm of 1-2 this evening, or are you preferring to go with something that involves continuing the hearing again?
I mean, you all, I think I've been pretty clear about my feelings about this design and the massing issues and the appropriateness for Canemah in general. And I really want to go with option number 5. However, I also, I do understand, wanting to move, not continuously hold things up or go back on HRB decisions of the past. Although I do think the HRB decision from the past was wrong and should never have been approved with this design, just based on the measurements that are laid out in the guidelines and scale. Is option number 1, I'm just clarifying with Kelly, is that would deny the garage location change as well as the tree removal plan that was presented last month? Is it basically rewinding essentially? That's what I'm trying to clarify. Is that what that is? And then number 2 is just the garage?
So option 1 would just be to deny the proposal in general, which means that you're not approving the garage relocation and you're not approving the tree preservation plan, meaning the applicant kind of is then goes back to the 2020 approval, which would still be valid, right, for the house and the garage in the back corner, and the condition of approval for a tree preservation plan, needing to come back to HRB if there are changes to that. Option 2 would deny the garage relocation, but acknowledge the tree preservation plan that's been in this month's agenda packet, not the last month's, but the one that's an actual tree protection plan, so you'd be acknowledging that and approving that plan, which proposes to remove the tree number 14. And, you can condition that approval if you would like.
Are we able to condition, or if we deny the proposal with option number 1, are we able to say we would like to see when you come back next month, this is what would encourage us to approve this design next month? Can we do say things like that?
I think I would defer to Carrie on that question.
Could we maybe say that number 4, we just extend this hearing and request more information? I would love to see also this decision on how we were able to reach this 40% or be below 40% in land disturbance. That was one of the reasons why it got kicked back originally, and how it got changed. And the total disturbance area, and leave it open to maybe there is some abilities that the mass can be reduced some way. This means we haven't made a decision. We're giving everybody time, including ourselves, to re-review this and come up with some way that some solution. And this it keeps everything open.
And just a couple of things here. I want to go to Carrie to respond to Board Member Belknap's question. But before I do that, just real quick, I want to highlight it's 9:45. If we don't conclude by 10 p.m., I think we have to request whether we can continue. Is that?
Yeah, you have to take a vote on whether to go past 10.
So let's go to Carrie, and then we'll kind of circle back on whether we need to go later or not.
So I think that the question that Board Member Belknap asked was deny the proposal and identify some recommendations for the applicant when they return with a new tree preservation plan and perhaps a different garage design. And it would be appropriate for the board to provide some essentially design advice. But it wouldn't be binding on any subsequent evaluation. With respect to Board Member Edgar's suggestion about option 4, the only way we can continue this is if the applicant will agree to extend the 120-day deadline. And so you would have to reopen the record in order to ask the applicant that question.
Whereas if we were to go with option 1, does that and they come back next month or the month after, that starts our timeline again? Yes?
They would have to appeal the board decision to the city commission.
I see.
For their review, or this decision will be final, and then they will file a new application that will start a new timeline, whether or not it's 6 months from now or 5 years from now. It's up to the applicant to just sort of start again.
I mean, I would say if there are board members who are uncomfortable or, other advisors who are uncomfortable with option number 5, I would vote for option number 1. And I feel like we need to have a little bit of a kind of a restart on this. I think there needs to be some changes made that maybe can't be made with our tight timeline. So I would be inclined to go with option number 1. And that's also the staff recommendation, I believe.
Thank you. I would support moving forward with option number 1. I'm hesitant to ask for a continuance or an extension to the deadline without, if we're requesting more information, I would like to, know in detail what information we're requesting. And I think we have all the information really that we need to make a decision on the application as it is. Board Member Ferry?
I agree with number 1. I would make a motion.
First,
okay, sorry.
real quick.
Go
I think, so if we're ready to move forward with the decision, then I think we'll go ahead and close the record to close the public record. And then do we need to adopt the findings, the staff's recommended findings before we make a decision or as part of the, review them as part of a decision or?
If the findings that are in the written staff report are the findings that you agree with, you don't have to do anything additional. If you want to add more findings, you're welcome to do that. But, kind of everything you've said is in the record and is considered a finding.
Okay.
So if we wanted, as it's been talked about, if we were going to suggest to the applicant ways in which they could alter their proposal that would be approved, is that something that we would say upon our denial as part of?
I think what Carrie indicated is that would be, you could consider it similar to design advice where you could, you could make your motion and vote, and then you could give kind of non-binding design advice.
Okay. Thank you.
Want to go ahead and.
Sure. So I make a motion to go with option 1 and deny the proposal for GLUA 2204 and HR 2201.
I'll second that.
I can call the roll. Board Member Belknap.
Aye.
Board Member Edgar.
Aye.
Board Member Ferry.
Aye.
Chair Blythe.
Aye. Application is denied. Did we want to capture some non-binding advice on?
I would just like to come back and say that I would love for it to be more consistent in height, mass, and to fit into the geologic hazard area more appropriately, which would require some scoping down in what is disturbed, and that also includes trees. It's every time you dig a tree out, you have to dig out the roots, and that can really create a lot of ground disturbance and be not in compliance with 1744. And so they have to prove that they can do it, and if they can't, then our recommendation is to come back with something that does fit.
Okay. Board Member Belknap, anything to add to that?
Yeah, just kind of along those same lines. I would like to see maybe more sensitivity to the delicate nature of this geologic area. With the change in the garage that was proposed, there was an expansion of the driveway. I would like to see paved surfaces, reduced. I would like to see maybe the size, the height, the mass of the garage reduced, or placed in a way that makes it less cumbersome to this lot and the surrounding scale of the other structures. Yeah, I would really like to see a plan for tree replanting maybe, and to see just there's some like thought going into that mitigation effort there as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Perry?
I agree with all the things that my fellow board members have said about height and massing, reducing them, perhaps narrowing the driveway to save tree number 7, or looking at some of the other trees on site that might be smaller that could be saved, or at least having a very aggressive replanting procedure laid out.
Thank you. And finally, yeah, I will just say that I agree with the other board members. Certainly open to modifications to the design that reduce the geological hazard impact to the land, whether that's a reduction in the massing of the garage or of the home or both or some combination, or potentially, you know, readjusting the garage to maybe reduce the driveway size, bring it a little closer to that flat area that might have less impact. And then echoing Board Member Ferry, if it's not possible in the final plan to preserve the you know, more of the trees that are in place today, maybe a more aggressive plan to replant and restore some of that tree canopy. All right, so that concludes the public hearing portion of the agenda. We'll move into communications.
Just a couple of things. May is Preservation Month, so on May 6th, the commission, May 4th, the City Commission will be reading the Preservation Month proclamation and awarding the Ruth Powers Preservation Award. So the board nominated Haley and Ike McGinnis, who own and live at 610 JQ Adams Street. They have a non-designated structure in McLaughlin that was built in the 1920s and was listed in the inventory form as altered with, but potentially reversible. And so they have reversed those alterations by removing the asbestos siding and restoring the original wood siding and wood window trim, along with the front door and porch. So the house is kind of back to its original state for the most part, and is probably now eligible to be designated. And so they are being recognized by the City Commission on the 4th as well. So they'll get the Preservation Award for 2022. And I believe that's all I've got.
Very good. Anything else from anyone? Okay, then we'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting at 9:56 p.m.